extravagance and wastefulness, yes, I would agree with you that we don't have enough resources to be that extravagant, to be that wasteful.
It's a good point that sort of shelter, clothing, food, water is our basic needs, but from my sort of worldview, and I don't want to assume your sort of what you believe, Faisal. Um, the that a god would prevent something like a global catastrophe or something like that, because I don't believe that's happening. And I want to explain my worldview. So um, from where I'm coming from, where we're sitting on a very small moat of a ball hurtling through the most hostile environment you can imagine, with sort of objects whizzing past us on a pretty frequent basis, if you consider the entire timeline of the Earth. And I don't think there's a God to stop, say, one hitting us, or stop, for instance, us creating enough CO2 to wipe us out, kind of thing. If we are just surviving and not thriving enough to leave this planet, I basically see it as we're just sitting on the planet waiting to die. So I mean, I'm not into transhumanism kind of thing. I don't think humans will be gods or whatever, but I do espouse the um, the nature of humans to reach beyond where they are, and that does require resources first and foremost. It just does. Um, the water situation, regardless of extravagance, water will be a problem just from the sheer amount of people. Water is required for crops. Water is required for the grow food to feed animal. Water is absolutely required, and on the current track, there's no if it will be a problem. It will be a problem, and that's irrelevant of any sort of extravagance you're trying to point out. Especially, and because water isn't, I mean, it's very heavy. It's hard to transport. Water pressure only transports it so far. Desert environments like the one that I live in, water's going to become a big problem. We're already in where I am recycling water from wastewater kind of thing, which I don't have a problem with. It's sort of one of the things that you have to accept. But there are certain individual resources that are just going to be an issue. And sorry, I'll just add this one point as well. And it also depends on quality of life, because there are some resources, like, for instance, helium, that we're kind of, there's going to be a shortage of helium sooner or later. And even if we stop sort of, putting them in balloons, and that's the extravagance you're talking about, and I completely agree with that, we're still, there is enough, not enough radiation decay to make the helium that we need, and it's used in a whole load of medical things, like it's a very stable catalyst for a lot of scientific and medical endeavors. So um, these are the things that we're going to find we are lacking, and they are, when you say essential, not essential for survival, but essential for a society and a people and a humanity that has well-being.
So that's um, uh, that's interesting. So a couple of questions that I do have here. So I do agree with your idea that we're probably just one big rock away from extinction. Um, no questions about that. However, the interesting thing is that the fact that you say that no God can save us from it, I actually have it the other way around completely. We're actually not, no rock has hit us because God has kept us safe from it. It's just the other way around how I see our existence as. And I actually find comfort in the idea that yes, there is a God protecting us from all of these rocks that are actually flying around in space, where we may be a spaceship hurtling through space, but um, we're we're protected in that sense, right? One of the other things, and it's interesting how a lot of this sort of um, boils down to what beliefs you have, right? Because when you think about it, your whole outlook changes with just how you believe in a certain aspect or a certain concept, right? Because the same set of events can result in a completely different outlook, a completely different choice, and a completely different um, future for an individual, right? So the idea of what we were talking about earlier, that um, when you go through suffering, the suffering, I'm not ever actually saying that suffering is is good in that sense. What I'm saying is suffering in of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it's really the choices a lot of the times after the suffering that makes you decide whether or not something is good or bad. What you went through is still suffering, no question about it. But when you look at the results of the suffering, that's when you can decide whether or not this was a good thing for you individually or a bad thing for you as an individual. When you look at certain things, for example, certain type of suffering, I would say per se, um, no, you would never want people to go through it, right? Other types of suffering, unless you go through it, you wouldn't grow as an individual, right? When I talk about the first one, for example, you don't want anyone to go through murder, right? You don't want anyone to go through rape. You don't want, so certain types of these sufferings that you would say um, can have really bad results, and very rarely would there be something good coming out of them, right? However, depending on the individual, right, on an individual basis, you can actually come out better or worse, right? So one of the other things that we've been talking about, the antinatalism, um, and the reason why I was bringing it up, and the reason why James I brought it up is that one interesting aspect of life is that unless you procreate, right, life won't exist. So the sometimes an idea or an ideology can actually result in more harm overall than it can um, than some actions even, right? So for example, I think if you remember sometime around 2000, there were some groups that actually thought that this was the end of the world. There were people who committed suicides as well, right? That the world is going to end, there's no point in living, let's take our lives, right? The concept itself can sometimes be um, a reason for it can become the means by which you end up suffering, pretty much. So for me, when I hear you say that, right, from my point of view, I'm hoping that you can actually see the other side and realize that no, there's actually grass here as well. There's probably meaning in where I don't find any meaning. Okay. I hope I'm making sense of what I'm trying to say, because it's a very difficult concept to get across.
Oh, these things are super simple. I'm sure everybody got it. Peace and respect, Caterpillar.
Yeah, hi
Hey, Kevin.
Caterpillar. They're gorgeous
You just
caterpillars.
let me know when you want me to respond to any of those parts, and
Well,
I
I
will.
think
No,
Batman
sure,
wanted to
James,
say
you can.
something as well.
That's
I
fine.
wouldn't
That's
mind
fine.
responding, but I think Batman's been waiting very patiently. It's up to you, Richard. Of course, your roommate.
Go ahead, Batman.
No, I think it was a good call.
Look, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Okay, so I let me just say this first. I do practice Zen Buddhism, right? And anyone who knows at least the smallest things about that particular religion or ideology, whatever you want to call it, is that life is suffering, right? Uh, Deeply, when you really look at it, um, existence within itself, right? Unless you're in a perfect state, uh, however that might manifest, you're going to suffer one way or the other. And so, I think one of the things that we as humans tend to do is that we tend to try to like moralize these realities that we experience, right? Whether they're good or bad. Like, sure, um, you know, if you really look at it, for example, going around to earn your food is to do that, it's some kind of suffering you have to go through. And suffering for a lot of people, right, is essentially just doing things that you don't want to do to get what you want, right? And so the problem that I have is that, okay, if it's a situation where you basically see existing as suffering, and that's, morally wrong, so to speak, right? Um, to me, that doesn't make any sense because there's more to life than suffering, right? There are things that you, and I mean, again, it depends on who you are as an individual and stuff like that, right? But I think that it would make more sense to take the position in just accepting things for what they are. Like in one of my books that I'm writing, in one of the scenes, a character basically asks, why does he have to suffer so much, right? And the answer that he got was, as long as he exists, he'll suffer. The only way he won't be able to suffer if he exists is if he exists within a way to where he cannot want anything, cannot feel anything, or experience anything, right? And so, you know, if you since you are suffering, right, the only thing you can do is to find your peace. Your peace could be in the form of life, or it could be in the form of death. But the only guaranteed peace we have, regardless of how much suffering or the level of suffering that you have or have experienced, is death. And so I don't necessarily see anything wrong with creating other humans voluntarily, right? Knowing that eventually, regardless of how much suffering or potential suffering that human is going to go through, there's going to be a good chance of a lot of happiness, right? Whatever the opposite of suffering might look for that individual, right? And there is still, and then there's going to be peace, right? Whether it's in their lives or when their life runs out. So that's just my take on it, on the whole antinatalist conversation as it relates to suffering.
Isn't the whole idea behind us trying to parent well is to adjust our children to the actuality so that they suffer as little as possible? Isn't it true that we try to protect our youth unable to fend for themselves in the larger world until they're ready enough that they can do it themselves, and in that reduce the suffering and increase the pleasure, the joy, the happiness, the love?
Yes, but in order to do that, they have to suffer, right? There's just certain
They,
things you're just not going to learn until you experience it. And
I believe
so,
that's true. Yeah.
you know, could make an argument that suffering is necessary, at least for us human beings, in order for us to thrive,
Yeah,
right?
it's a very interesting point that you bring up because my personal philosophy for parenting is that I want my kids to go through the suffering while I'm here so that I can guide them on how to manage it, essentially, how to come out of it. And so to basically let them fall and teach them how to get up, so to speaking. Because no matter what you do, um, you cannot help them avoid everything that they will face in life. And there will be a point in time where you won't be there um, to look after them anymore. If you fix everything for your kids, for example, right? Um, when push comes to shove and you're not around, would they be in a position to make the right choice to um, to get back up after they've fallen, so to speaking?
Yeah, and I mean, for me, for the most part, right? It's not necessarily just about the survival aspect of it. I think a lot of it also has to do with the building of character, and not necessarily just as individuals, but as a species, right? And the way how I look at it is, you know, I to some extent I agree with Mark's reason why he holds his position, right? But I think that in order for us to get past the point that we are right now, it would require a lot of suffering for us to get to the point to where we'll be able to optimize our usage of the environment, to get to the point of going out of space and going out of our solar system, or even if it means changing our biology to the point where we'll be able to travel, you know, space long term and stuff like that. Like in order to get to those points, right, we're most likely going to have to suffer, right?
Well, I
Whether, you know,
sorry.
whether it's uh, oh, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. If you've finished your thought, Batman, I don't want to
Yeah,
interrupt you.
so whether it's, you know, a giant rock falling on the earth from outer space, or us using up resources to the point where there is not enough on the planet, even though statistically I don't necessarily think that's going to be a thing for quite a long time. But regardless of whichever that suffering might manifest, we're going to be put in a position to where, in order to survive as a species and as a collective, we're going to have to do something about it. And chances are it's not going to be a perfect solution, and it's most likely going to involve more suffering, right? But I think people like to live, and I think people um, think that the suffering that they experience is worth the rewards that they're going to be getting, regardless of their contribution.
Well, I
So
think
yeah, that's my mindset on it.
yeah, no, I'm Batman. You brought up some really good points that, but I want to sort of differentiate slightly how I would consider struggle to suffering kind of thing, and I kind of agree with Fazel when he sorry, Batman. I do apologize, Batman, when he sort of says that suffering is necessary. I think that's true for struggle and challenges and things like that. But there's some suffering which is absolutely not necessary for children, for them to learn, sort of, you know, I think sort of building that sense of fortitude towards your struggles in your life. I think that true suffering, like for instance, there's no necessary suffering in a child being beaten or a child being abused or anything like that. I think it's completely unnecessary for their lives. It doesn't
I think
build
we can all
character.
agree to that, yeah.
Absolutely. So I at least want to sort of put across the idea that some suffering is absolutely not necessary. Even if you think that sort of having challenge and struggle, or probably what I would define as challenge and struggle, is necessary to build character. True suffering definitely isn't. There's no reason I can see why a child needs to suffer. Um, and as James was sort of saying, there are situations where the children cannot escape this suffering that they're going through. They're placed in it. I think there is nothing necessary about that. And it's interesting you brought up the rock issue, the flying rock issue. Yes, we've been hit by asteroids. It's very strange, Fazil, that you sort of say, hey, the fact that we haven't been hit by asteroids when we've been hit by asteroids constantly throughout the Earth's lifespan, or however
Yeah.
you want to look at it, through the Earth being here. And I mean, I can point to I can never pronounce the name Chicxulub, which was supposed to have wiped out the dinosaurs. There's a big crater, I think, in Utah somewhere, of this essentially nearly a world killer. The only organisms to survive were sort of very small and furry animals, essentially. They did wiped out, and maybe some small
I thought that was
reptiles.
off the Yucatan Peninsula.
I don't know America very well. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I
You
can
don't
look
have
it
to.
up. I can never
It
pronounce it. I
drives me
can.
crazy that Australia is upside down. So
No, we're the right way up, sir. What are you talking about?
yeah, the
Um,
rest of us we're upside down. That's how it works.
yeah. Right. Dinosaurs. Um, India.
I could be
Oh, it is
wrong.
Yucatan. So where is Yucatan? Where is that? Oh, in Mexico. Okay, so it's Mexico.
Northern South America.
Yeah, and that would explain the name. Okay, so we are being hit by these things on a,
You
you
killed me,
know,
man.
thanks. No, correct me, Richard. That's perfectly fine, man. If
That's
you to
funny.
do so.
No, I just like that explains the name. I was like,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
that's why
really
it's such
does.
an exotic Hispanic sounding name. Yeah.
Right. So these craters that we find, and these we are being struck fairly regularly. Now our atmosphere protects them from most of them, but we know from these craters and the events that have happened, they don't protect us from all of them. And I mean, there's other issues like thank you, Peter. Volcanic eruptions. There's a super volcano underneath Yellowstone that if that pops, we're going to be in serious trouble. There's all kinds of things, so it's not just that. But what I'd like you to do, Faisal, is sort of imagine if you didn't believe in a god that would stop this from happening. Where there your priorities would lie, and what you would be trying to do as a human, if you didn't believe that anything was there to stop these things from happening, um, and maybe so you'll understand why sort of we're looking at, and my morality is probably different than James. I take a view on well-being being a positive utility that I'm after, not an elimination of suffering. So what I can sort of say is that if somebody suffers and then their well-being is increased afterwards, then that I would define as necessary suffering. um, but if their well-being is not increased by the suffering, then it is inherently bad and immoral. So I know moral only applies to choices, and there can be things that don't have choices, but inherently evil or bad, basically. So I come from a different position than James. Um,
I, I think I actually have that challenge, Mark, in that if there is heaven and
right.
if there is future earths where empathy from heaven is extended to future earths for their suffering, for the suffering that those ascended do have, then that all kind of makes sense to me.
So future Earths, as in future Earth-like planets that we go to, basically. So exoplanets.
Yes, exoplanets,
Okay.
and those also terraformed, and human beings on them. Our same animal.
Right.
Okay.
So where are you saying morality is coming from then?
I say the I believe the suffering is justified in future humans and our empathy upon ascension for those future humans.
Well,
And
yeah. If
that
sorry, go ahead.
and one necessary part of it, I'll wrap it up real quick. One necessary part of it is that I think that, and this is very matrixy sounding, the first program had to be abolished because people wouldn't accept a perfect life. That without some amount of suffering, be it by our perspective excessive, right now, um, in the third person experience of this was my life when I suffered, those ascended it wouldn't be as personalized as it is right now, and then there'd be some small percentage of those ascended who understood suffering in a real way, and that would help keep suffering out of the utopian society, i.e., it would be the maintenance of the utopian society as a necessity.
Yeah, well, I think sort of going to exoplanets, or there's got to be a certain amount of struggle and probably suffering with them. I think that
Mm-hmm.
if the well-being of our species, our societies, and who we are as humans is increased, then that suffering would be worth it. However, I don't find that the suffering itself is a good thing. I think that sort of looking at it dialectically, like
No.
there are good and bad parts about it. It may have had a good outcome,
Yeah.
but the suffering isn't good. And I'll point this out because if you've got two conclusions, right, you have the settlement of exoplanets, right, which is a good example because there's got to be suffering and struggle and challenges and, people working through stuff to be able to get to it. But if we take out the suffering, just say we can do it, just somehow we get the technology by some way that we can just do it without any suffering, right? Um, it will be a good thing even without the suffering. That will be a good outcome. So it can't be the suffering that is adding to the good outcome because it's going to be a good outcome either way. Um, I think that's why I want to differentiate between challenge, which makes you extend yourself to rise
Sure.
to something, overcoming something, and true suffering, where you're sort of being beaten down into submission, or something really terrible is happening to you, and just
Mm-hmm.
because and I would differentiate the two, and I would say that suffering is never a good thing, even though there are things that are good that can be found as a consequence of it.
Hey, Mark,
I
can
So
I ask a
yeah,
clarification question? I'm sorry
yeah,
to
sure,
interrupt.
sure, yeah.
Um, don't you think? Don't you think if if people, if someone has never experienced bad, would you say how would they determine if something is good?
Well, I think that you can have bad things happen without suffering per se. I think I would sort of take suffering to be um, a sort of more extreme version of something bad happening, and maybe that's just me in my mind. I've got a different definition of what suffering is, but um, yeah, I think that things that can happen that are bad, but I wouldn't necessarily define them as suffering per se. Like your car can break down. I wouldn't say you're suffering. If you had to wait in the heat for it to be towed, maybe I would define that as suffering. Like here in Australia, you're in 45-degree heat, like waiting for a tow truck, like you're just suffering. I would sort of define that as suffering, but not your car breaking down isn't necessarily what I would call. I wouldn't say, "Hey, my car broke down. I was suffering because it broke down." Um, it's usually,
however, your liver breaks down, that's suffering.
oh, well, I think it's not that your liver breaks down that's the suffering, it's what comes with it. The extended
That's what I mean.
period of misery or pain, or sort of this ongoing sort of a pain. You might stub your toe and you wouldn't say, "Hey, I'm suffering," kind of thing. However, if you're experiencing chronic pain for years on end, you're suffering at that point. So I think there must be a designation made, which I haven't really
It's hard
given
to
it
know
any
where to draw that
serious.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
Mark,
hard
I
to
think
draw the line, sure.
I I I
Yeah,
I I would say that suffering, yes, there are degrees to suffering. I can understand what you're trying to
Sure.
get at. That certain type of suffering really is so small on, if there was to be a scale, that you are not even going to classify that as suffering. But it's still suffering if you go by what it means, right? It is it is anything that causes you any type of hardship, right?
Okay.
That's a more broader
Yeah.
definition. And probably in the context that you're mentioning this is that hardship essentially is causing pain, right? So if something causes you pain, that's what you're calling as suffering. But I think a broader definition is that any type of hardship that you go through, right? Be that a flat tire, it is a sort
Okay.
of suffering, right?
Okay.
But I do understand your point on where you're getting to, and I think in one way I can agree that th- uh, generally in life it's, and I'm coming from a moral point of view which I believe in, right? That you should go through life with the idea of reducing suffering for not just yourself but the people around you, right? That's the general rule. um, and then again at times there's things that you cannot do, right? But at the same time I think what I'm trying to say about suffering is that it's I'm not saying that it's a good thing per se, right? What I'm trying to say, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So to generalize suffering as always being bad or resulting in something bad isn't a complete view of suffering. You're
I
So
would agree.
ignoring
If
that
you,
part,
yeah,
right?
if you're using suffering as sort of any hardship at all, sure, I can accept that definition, and under that, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah. No, I get what you're saying, Fazl. I do agree that some suffering can be a good thing if it leads to a good outcome, sort of so consequentialism.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah.
And there's something, Batman, that you mentioned earlier in your sort of trip down um, just the cosmic lane, let's say, where you said that maybe human beings would have to suffer and probably change into something else, some other species, before we end up in a different planet. Do you think, or would you consider us still being humans at that point? And do you think that going through that type of suffering, which changes us that much, is that um, not just the suffering, but the idea that we would no longer be human in one sense, right? That's how I see it. Because if we change our DNA, if we change into some other species, essentially we're no longer human, right? Then would you then consider that as a morally justified position just for the human race to survive and not no longer be the human race?
um so this is where we go into the conversation of evolution. So I'm going to answer your question by kind of outlining an example, right? Let's say Yellowstone explodes, right? And there's so much dust and soot and all of that stuff, it covers the globe, right? And you know, all sunlight is blocked out, all that stuff, and we have um, what's basically another ice age, an extreme one. Now, let's say that eventually, right, we started to see humans being born with certain, I think they're called enzymes, right, in their bodies that allows them to operate efficiently in the cold. Basically, as if, it's a nice day out for a normal, regular human, right? And we have a mechanism to spread that to all other humans, right? Now, yes, that would most likely require changing our DNA, right? But the interesting thing about being human, right, or just being a biological organism, that's changing every day, constantly, right? And so we're only calling ourselves humans right now, um, you know, based on the difference of other species that exist, right? And so I don't necessarily think the term the term we associate really matters, right? Because I think most people would agree that being a being human, right, is just being a part of this specific species, or being among these specific animals that you can reproduce with, live with, right, and you look alike and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily see that as being an immoral thing. um, you know, I don't even, to be frank, I don't necessarily see any moral issues that could come from it. Mainly because, especially knowing the fact that it's going to reduce the suffering, right, of other humans, right? So, you know, to me, you could probably look at it as the ends justify the means type of view, right? But again, I'm of the view that just by existing, you're suffering one way or the other. And if we can, and our job is to reduce that suffering and reproduce,
Okay,
right?
before you reply, and I'm sorry to be rude, Faisal, it seems there is enough interest in you in the side chat that I would invite you to do a one-on-one show with me. And it seems that there are a lot of misunderstandings within my audience base about what Islam is and what the Quran actually reads. So if you would you don't have to reply right now, but that's why I provided you my email. If you would consider that, I would thank you for even considering it.
Yeah, we can definitely connect on that.
Okay. And Batman was saying ultimately there is going to be suffering where there is life, and that we are only right now human, and human changes.
Yeah. So the way how I look at it is that it's not necessarily about something being morally good or bad. It's more so, does it, does it make sense to do this thing regardless of um, the 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 ups and downs, right?
So
And
essentially, the ends justify the means, in short.
yes,
A
Okay.
not
little
in every
Machiavellian to me.
situation. Yeah, to be fair, yeah, you're right, Mark. I will agree with that, right? However, I don't necessarily think this is required in every circumstance to justify suffering, right? Because as Mark brilliantly said, in my opinion, right, there is unnecessary suffering, and the only thing that I see that could fix that problem as now, right, is death, and giving the people the choice of of death. That's the only peace that's the only real peace you have. When you die, you're not gonna be locked up in some dark closet forever. Just that's being dead is not an experience, right? And so by not experiencing, right, there's no more suffering. Same way how we look at, single cell organisms, for example, right? Are they experiencing things, right? If your answer is no, right, then if you squish one of them, or if you take some antibiotics or something like that, that kills them, right? Um, then they're not suffering.
Well,
That's the way how I see it.
that would address James, but it wouldn't address me because my moral standard isn't to reduce suffering; it's to increase well-being. So, sort of cruelly killing animals, it's not going to be good for your well-being at all. Your psychological well-being, if you go around killing animals, is probably going to be lessened to a great degree. So I
Yeah,
understand if
I'd
you're trying
agree.
to, yeah, no, I understand if you're trying to minimize suffering, you could make that argument, Mr. Batman, sorry, Batman. I don't want to conflate you with Mr. Bam, and I'm sorry.
Please don't. Not the
no,
same
you're
guy.
way better than that guy. Anyway, no, but like, I understand that is a valid argument, and that's one of the reasons why I don't subscribe to minimizing suffering, because you get these examples of, hey, if you could give everybody a pill which made them happy, ecstatically happy all the time, you might eliminate some suffering because no one can be depressed or upset, but their well-being certainly wouldn't be good. They would be in a state of, chemical haze their entire life. That's not what I would consider to be a person with good well-being. And same with
Exactly.
killing people to reduce suffering. That the well-being is not. You can't have well-being if you're killing people. Their well-being is never improved by killing people. However, well-being is a weird term. It kind of, you can make an argument for, if somebody is in absolute pain and suffering and torment, and it would be better for their well-being to end that suffering, I could make the argument for euthanasia as being a better morally. However, their suffering would have to be at a point where it would be, overwhelming kind of thing. It would be absolutely unbearable. Um, and we want to give people autonomy because that's good for the well-being of society as well. So people being able to choose for themselves what will happen to them is good for society, and society's well-being. But I understand your argument. I would like to give James a chance to respond, because it was sort of
Yeah,
more
go ahead,
covers
James. I'm
his.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here. So, I've been following all the conversations for the last, I don't know, almost an hour now since I last talked. Um, and I don't mind, right? Because there are a lot of people things to say, and I value all of it. Here's the thing, though: listening to every single person on this panel that has spoken since me, I have been significantly misunderstood, and there just isn't enough time tonight to unravel it all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule a stream on my channel where I clarify everything that people misunderstood here. And
I,
normally Mark Reed completely understands me, like even if he doesn't agree. And I just feel like, man, I did a bad job explaining myself tonight.
I'm so sorry. I
And
don't want to misrepresent you, James. On it, if I say something that's please do correct me. I'm more than happy for you to correct me. Absolutely. I
right.
don't want to
Well,
misrepresent you.
if I interrupted every single person every time they misunderstood something I'd said, you guys never would have got a sentence out. So I'm just like,
Well, that's
I'm gonna
depressing, but
schedule.
okay.
It is what it is, and I'm not taking it personal. It's just that maybe I'm
Okay.
not. Maybe I started off on my A game and slipped down to my C game, and that's on me. And I'll correct it tomorrow, or as soon as I'm feeling up to it, I'll
Need
I'll
more
start a
input.
stream on my channel, and I'll go back over this and I'll clarify my thoughts. But a lot of what you guys
Can you
said
post
was
it in
spot
the
on.
side chat? The link to your channel?
Oh yeah, I can do that. I'll do
If you
that.
wanted to go ahead and create the stream, if you're going to stick around long enough, please feel free to post it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
and
could
do
do that now and
subscribe
just
to James.
forward
He
some
runs a
more.
really good channel. Like, I'm subscribed. I really love the stuff that he puts out. Very, very insightful and thoughtful.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll create one for tomorrow. Uh, 2 p.m. probably Eastern Standard Time if that works for you guys. So I
Yeah, I
don't. Is
think
there is there a
none of these topics are very easy to express, and that's what's interesting to me is trying to sort these things out between us.
right? So
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna make it. I'll be quiet for a minute while I'm making the stream, and then I'll jump back over to let you guys. I'll post it in the channel. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Sure. I
So,
I, I do
I,
want to pose a question before we continue because, um, Matt, when you talk about well-being, what do you necessarily mean by the term well-being?
Okay, so I think it would be, well-being would be the, health, either the physical or mental health of an individual or the society. And so the problem comes in that, when to prioritize the society and when to prioritize the individual. I think that we can come up with, or really, my position is that there are a number of fundamental rights we can base upon the well-being of a person. Like they need these to have well-being, and I think you outlined some of them, sort of food, shelter, water, that kind of thing. There's also some mental things. They used to be called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's not used in psychology anymore. It's a bit different, but there are certain things like self-actualization, um, a feeling of safety, a feeling of acceptance. There are certain things that humans intrinsically need to have a healthy psychological mind and a healthy and a healthy body, of course. So these food, shelter, water, etc., etc. So we can base that as the needs of humans as the essentials for well-being, and so make some basic rights that are sort of inviolatable as far as humans are concerned. But beyond that, we have to start looking at how do we make the well-being of society better? How do we um, um, create a healthy society? Both because I mean, society is made up of humans, so the humans have to be healthy, and we have our essentials for that. And then we have to look at what makes the society healthy, and we can start to sort of make some objective determinations on what makes a society healthy. I mean, you can sort of say, hey, a society that even outside of human rights, like you can't murder because obviously that violates well-being. A society that just allows people to just go round hurting animals or something, that's not going to make a healthy society. A society that allows people to, go around speeding everywhere, that's not going to make it. We can make these objective designations from studying the outcomes of what will make a society have more well-being or less well-being, and that's what I base my morality on.
Okay.
I hope that
You know,
explains what I mean.
hey Mark,
Yeah,
so I have this idea, right, that I
yeah,
think that humans humans are universally immoral for not burying our dead in biodegradable coffins and in locations where other plants and animals would basically be able to get nutrients that we have. Now, under certain circumstances, the idea would be to, for example, certain disease people that have certain disease viruses, right? Those we would cremate, right, and destroy
okay.
whatever, so that doesn't get spread if they're eaten or it gets put in the soil and stuff like that. Because
Mm.
I don't know, and by the way, I don't. There's no science backing this. This is just purely based on my intuition,
No, no,
right?
I get you. Yeah, yeah,
I think we humans are taking too much out of the system and not putting back enough when by essentially burying our dead to where don't we can we don't our bodies don't put anything back into the environment. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Right?
yeah. I think that there's a number, like, and you're probably right. I think though that what I would sort of say is that, hey, you'd be morally virtuous, or it would be, you'd be morally superior doing something like that. However, I understand there's constraints of people. Those biodegradable sort of tree pods and coffins and things, they're kind of expensive. Um, and I would like to be buried in sort of, they have these things where they basically put tree seeds in the thing, and you are the fuel for a tree. I think that's beautiful, but they're very expensive at the same time, so people can't necessarily afford them. There's other circumstances where people aren't sort of able to do what they would like to do. Sometimes it is a case that cremation is the cheapest option. Something that they can't afford a burial plot. There's other constraints to people's actions. Whereas you might be morally superior, I don't think you would say, "Hey, you're immoral for just burying your loved one, in a normal coffin, etc., etc." I mean, you may well be right. I don't think, however, that that's because as humans, we do have to prioritize sort of. So there are things that are pressing problems on us, and things further down the track, and unfortunately, we can't give everything the same attention. So things like sort of climate change at the moment is the pressing problem. I think that the burying of our dead isn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, it may be a factor. I haven't read a huge amount about it, but I don't think it's sort of the pressing problem that, say, climate change is, for instance, if that makes sense. So, um, if it was the pressing problem that climate change is, I would agree with you that maybe not uh, I mean, disposing sounds like such a horrible word. Disposing of our dead in a way that assists the well-being of our society and people would be morally bad, but I don't think I would rise to that at the moment. Just one thing to
So
add to Batman.
okay,
Morality is such a complex subject. Like, it is so complex. It's one of the most complex things we can talk about. So I realize you may completely disagree and I may disagree, and that's okay. I get that. It's just insanely complicated. A lot of variables in there. I get it. So, go for it. Sorry.
yeah. So for me, right, I think one of the really awesome things about being human is that we are very efficient creatures, or we can be, right? And you know, coffins are expensive because they take a lot of material to make, right? They take a lot of work to make and stuff like that, right? Um, but let's say wooden coffins, right? A wooden coffin doesn't have to be or doesn't need to be elaborate. And I mean, I understand the idea. People are probably going to call me reprehensible for this, but I'm sorry, but a person who is dead is not going to care about the coffin that they're in, right?
Well, it's
And
sorry. Go
so
ahead.
the way how I see it is that spending thousands of dollars and putting thousands of hours into making extremely elaborate coffins, right? To where whenever we degrade, right, we don't put anything back into the system, right? I think that is, I think that's part. And again, I don't have any solid evidence for this. I might actually put some research into it and come up with something more concrete, right? This is just solely my intuition, right? But I think that I think that our attachment to the dead is contributing to the destruction of the environment, right? The
Okay, pause right
environment
there.
meaning, oh, sorry.
Okay. I mean, I love these, but they have to be teasers because no one gets to actually finish. And I'm sorry that's the sad situation. But I hope more people will come together on individual channels because of these conversations. And let's kick it over to Math Pig and then, of course, Stephanie.
I
Math
think
pig.
that's you.
Of course, he's going to be expected to unmute.
And
There you go.
wake up!
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Wake up!
I'm just
Wake
It's
up!
good to
I'm
see
sorting
you.
my stuff. I was on Discord earlier. If anyone hasn't known, tomorrow, look up Let's Debate. If Let's Farm has come across, they're doing their very first live stream, live debate, live open panel. Go by
Is
Let's
that
Farm.
spelled with two T's?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I'm just listening. I only come in just as I come in. Just listening.
You just grace
Stephanie,
It's
you
us
came
late.
in
with your
because you had a thought. I'm sure Stephanie had a thought about this very
Yeah,
grace
conversation.
us
I
with
had
your
all
beauty.
sorts of thoughts, and then the conversation took a turn towards death, and I wondered if it was because of my advanced age.
Oh
Probably.
no,
Yeah.
no. So I was actually going to connect that with the suffering conversation,
Right.
but
Yep.
Well,
It,
my thought on uh, my thoughts specifically were on suffering and well-being, and I had a lot of thoughts. One of the things that I learned recently was that the word dukkha doesn't it's often translated as suffering, but it's the etiology of the word, or not etiology. What's the right word?
Etymology.
Etymology.
Etymology, yeah.
Etymology, not entomology. Otherwise, Bree would
No,
be here.
that's
Mm.
But
bugs.
the etymology of the word comes from it comes from all the hole, and it's like a malformed axle hole creates a bumpy ride. So really, one might say life is a bumpy ride. Like the nature of life is just not smooth. It's never going to be smooth, and we can try to make the ride through smoother. Maybe alter this stuff, but um, I think well-being is a better approach, and for as a basis of morality. And the point is that we don't need to make the axle hole more uneven. We don't need to make things difficult for people. Uh, and that promotes well-being and at least doesn't increase suffering.
Stephanie, would you be so kind as to keep these cowboys reined in while I have a cigarette?
Sure, I'm having one while I sit here, but that's because I'm
Well, you can
privileged.
smoke it indoors and I can't. All right, thank you.
I'll try. I'm putting my moderator's hat on.
Stephanie's a fear monger. Don't leave Stephanie in charge. Get a whip
Yes,
No,
her.
I
Stephanie's
am a
fine.
fear monger. I'm a terrifying human being.
Wow.
Yeah. So I do
That
want
was
to add.
that's my contribution to the.
First time I saw
I do
you, I
want to
thought
add something
terrifying.
Just
Sure.
to what Stephanie just said. There's a concept in the Quran, right? When you read it in chapter 107, right? And basically, one of the key concept in there is that um, one of the things that a Muslim cannot do, in a sense, is to refuse small acts of kindnesses, right? And the idea being that it goes to the point which you keep bringing up, Mark, that wellness.
Sorry, Faze, you cut out there for me. Is that for everybody?
no, that's following.
Well, I don't
You
hear
guys can
Faze
still
anymore.
hear me?
I can hear now,
I
but
got you.
okay, maybe
Yeah,
it's
all
my
good
side.
here.
Okay. So what I was saying is sort of uh, increasing wellness is sort of a better measure compared to reducing suffering. But the big question is, when you think about it, right? How do you make sure there's more wellness, and how do you regulate it, right? Because we all sort of know whenever the government sort of puts their foot into anything, they mess up, because you cannot force someone to be a better person to others, right? Whenever you enforce a good rule, there's always people. It's human nature to find out ways to go against what they're forced to do, right?
Was that the only two questions?
Can I ask questions? Yeah.
Um, either Fazl's cutting out or he's finished. Fazl, are you still there?
I'm still here.
I
Faisal,
can hear him.
Faisal is yeah, he's been constant for us, Mark. I don't know. Maybe
Oh,
he needs
Yeah,
to
it's
I
okay.
think
maybe
it's
the
refresh
from
or
exchange.
your
something.
end, Mark.
Maybe I'll try
In
and
fact,
ring him
keep
Are
again.
going
you
Yeah.
are
through.
you Faisal? Are you done with your thought, or it seemed like you
No,
hadn't quite reached the end?
no. So let me just finish that up, because the way I see it, um, if you think about a practical way of increasing wellness, it's the idea to instill the idea into pretty much every human that they have to be there for the other people around them. Okay. And it's not an easy idea to instill in them without having a sort of because a lot of times, for someone to for someone to act in a way which helps the other person, or the other, you end up sacrificing on your end, or you end up suffering. At the minimum level, it's a hardship in the sense that you're spending time that you could have spent somewhere else to better yourself or to better your own well-being, sort of speaking. But the idea that these small acts of kindnesses raise the level of the general wellness of a society uh, is it's one of those ideas that's not possible, I believe, without having a concept of uh, an ultimate transcendent um, reward for it, which you may not receive in this world.
Okay. Uh,
Um,
could I could I
Sure.
talk to that just briefly? I think that raises the point of, if should one have a concept of an ultimate transcendent being. There are many societies that are organized around that concept, um, and have enshrined that concept into law, the result of which is suffering for large classes of people, um, particularly women. It does. Is it increasing well-being to forbid girls from receiving an education? Is it
No.
is it is it enhancing well-being uh, to create a structure of polygamy? So it's this is where things get political, and I don't know that I don't. First of all, I don't think that it's been proven that societies organized around the concept of a supreme being and the law of of universal wisdom hasn't proven in human society to promote well-being universally, which is why I think that uh, the reliance on anything other than our own capacity for empathy for each other, I think that's probably a more productive path to tread down. And one can appeal to, in Islam, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, one can appeal to the best parts of those traditions, uh, to call upon us to show our empathy and to do better. That's my thought
um,
on that. But
Okay, I'd like to address it as well because I'd subscribe to the well-being model as well. And I think Steph's made some excellent points there, absolutely excellent. That we see these societies that are theocracies that have made the designation of morality and therefore legislative outcomes their faith, and it doesn't seem to have increased the well-being of their people. In fact, I'm sure we can point to some horrible cases where it hasn't. There are secular societies that their people do have a sort of a first world level of well-being, like Japan, for instance, very secular country. Australia's pretty secular now; it's getting up to 40% atheist, and its implementation is secular. So all of these countries that are doing well, and I can point to the Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Finland and places like that. They seem to have implemented societal structures that are very good for their populations. Sweden's got the best Finland has the best education in the world, for instance, very secular country. So the evidence is there that a sort of believing in an ultimate transcendent being does not necessarily get you to a society that has well-being. So your first question was, how do you make sure there is more well-being, and that's where we have to study the outcomes of different policies put in place. And I'm not saying that they're going to get it right all the time. I'm not saying that, hey, governments will get it right 100% of the time, kind of thing. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that. And we have to differentiate here between legislative and moral things, like so things you put into law and what we see as moral, because they're not necessarily the same thing. There's certain things put in law that we're going to morally disagree with. But this is my moral stance towards a better society, and that's the one I would promote. How do you regulate it? That again is you're sort of making a category error, but between a legal standing and a moral standing, what we ought to do. Um, because when we say what we ought to do, there's things that are in society that are um, you know, not illegal, but they're still immoral. Like, there's nothing really preventing you from taking a sign out and sort of speaking hate against groups in America at the moment. It's not illegal, but I would certainly say it's immoral because it's harming the well-being of others. If subject certain groups, and let's face it, a while ago it was with segregation and Jim Crow, certain things were legal to do, but I would still say they're immoral because they harmed the well-being of people, and that's where I'm coming from. Um, so how do we sort of implement it in reality? Well, we implement it like any other moral system. We behave in such a way that you behave in the society that you want. So if I want to be treated with kindness and humanity, then I have to do that for other people. And that basic concept is called reciprocity. It's basically when you do something, other people will do the same for you. It's almost a social contract, and it's a hallmark of social animals that we do work together in this way. That when we are doing things for other people, they're doing things for us. I don't think there's anything unusual about that in societies, but I don't think, like for instance, the moral essentials that I was talking about, like food, shelter, the right to autonomy, the right to bodily integrity, so you're not murdered and things. They're things we can legislate. If you're talking about the things for society beyond that, we may not be able to legislate them into practice. It may be that we as a society must just decide that we're not going to denigrate others, that we are going to treat them with kindness, that we are going to provide empathy. I don't think, sort of, if you try to legislate every single moral in the world, then you'll quickly find you have a totalitarian society.
So, Mark, just
Yeah,
to just to go back, I think you and I are pretty much saying the same thing. This is exactly what I meant
Yeah,
here, that you
I was just
cannot.
about to say that.
So this is what I meant, that you cannot legislate more morality, pretty much, right? Because, like I said earlier, that once you start legislating certain moral actions, right, it's human nature to try to find ways to go against that because people don't like being forced into doing things, right? What I was trying to point out here is that, firstly, um, in a society where there is no transcendental legislation, let's put it that way, there is no way um, to have any objective moral standard, because we just in there's six people in this panel right now. Each one of us has a different opinion of what is morally right. We don't have an objective opinion of what is morally right. So the question comes up, which what exactly is objective morality, right? It has to be agreed upon as a standard, as something which everybody can say that even if I have a different opinion, objectively this is right and this is wrong. All right. So in that sense, my opinion doesn't matter. What's objectively moral is what matters, right?
So,
Okay, so here's you, you're you. Let me grant you your point. I would I would posit that
Is it
the
me or
the
is
sol-
Stephanie cutting off?
It sounds
It's not
fine to
just
me.
you. Stephanie is cutting in and out. Just could
Yeah.
you get a little closer to your microphone?
well, I can on my earbuds. I don't know. Am I
Oh,
still cutting in and out?
could you keep your right hand from between your mouth and the earpiece?
Something's buzzing. I don't know what the
Something is
buzzing
buzzing. I
is.
don't know who it
It
is.
it's Batman. I already got it. Just don't put your
Oh,
right hand between your mouth and your cheek,
Okay,
Stephanie. Okay.
I'll give it my best shot. My
Well, that wasn't it.
Stephanie,
my
tuck your hair behind your ears. Tuck it behind your ears.
jeez.
'Cause if you're
Tell
using
you what.
earbuds near the mic, your hair will block.
We'll try this. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Um, my if I grant that you need to have a higher moral standard, an objective moral standard. How do you do that in a multicultural society where not everybody's going to agree on even that? Ultimately, if you have a society that surrenders its moral will to a higher power, say a god or a system of religious beliefs, um, that's all very well and good, but you're basically saying, take this, let this cup pass from me and let God decide. I don't think that works very well either, because that's sort of basically taking the approach of the Pope toward the Cathars, kill them all, let God sort it out. And I don't think that works.
That literally was a T-shirt that my father's regiment produced back in 80s, 90s. Whenever I was growing up, my mum used to walk around hoovering and stuff with a T-shirt with a skull on it, with like a snake thing for the symbol of their regiment that said, "Kill them all, let God sort them out."
So what I think is we need to do the hard work of talking through political battles here on God's green earth between between the people that we have to deal with, and try to come to some sort of understanding that your beliefs aren't sufficient to, no one's beliefs are sufficient to create a universal morality. It's the process of sorting out consensus of, okay, we can do this and leave this sector to one's own. you know there's the government sector, and then there's the personal sector, and we can sort it out that way.
Can I
okay.
respond
Well,
to
I'd
Stephanie
like
before?
well,
Yeah,
I'd
go
like to
ahead,
say
Mark, then.
something just before, because you sort of said that I agreed with you, and I couldn't disagree with you enough. I don't. There is no way that an ultimate transcendent being is needed for morality. All that's needed
No,
is
no,
for
no, that's not what I said we agreed on.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I sort of object to the whole idea of transcendent legislation, and let's discuss for a moment the whole idea of objective morality, because it hasn't been demonstrated to me that there is any kind of transcendent being that this objective morality, supposedly is giving us this objective morality. So, in actual fact, it can't seem to be demonstrated that the morality is in fact objective. Now, I subscribe to meta-ethical relativism, and what that means is that the goal of I don't believe in objective morality. I think that the goal can be whatever you want. There's nothing in the universe that says you have to care about humans, or you have to care about society, or you have to care about people. I don't think there is anything.
Evolution.
Well, that's an argument, but there's other evolutionary drives not necessarily leading towards a societal outcome. Like, there's nothing in evolution that says, "Hey, you have to build a society to survive." Right? There's plenty
No,
of
I don't say
species.
that it's built into that you have to,
Right.
but it does create. what is it? Coincidence is not circumstance, or what is that?
Correlation is not causation.
Thank you. I knew I was wrong, but I knew you'd get it. Yeah, it's
Right.
exactly that.
Right. Well, I don't think evolution rises to the level of a moral system being objective. I think there are tools that we have as social creatures, like empathy and reciprocity, that allow us to um, understand the moral system within our societal. As a societal animal, we can understand these things using these tools that evolution has sort of given us as developed. But I don't think that it anyway. So I don't think objective morality exists. I understand your point, MathPig. I would disagree, and I could outline a whole thing of why I disagree. However, I think that once we get a framework, once we agree that society is important, that people are important, that the well-being of these things are important, if that's what we agree on, Faisal, and that's what I was getting to, then objective evaluations of what is better for the well-being of society and what is better for the well-being of individuals can then be made. And we're not going to agree, I would presume, on what that is. But it doesn't seem like that transcendent legislation and legislation based upon theocratical dogma gets us to a society with better well-being. The health of the society isn't increased. The happiness of the society certainly isn't increased. There's a whole load of metrics, and theocracies score right at the dead last. They are dead last. So I don't think there's a way you could convince me that a society based on transcendental legislation, or essentially a theocracy, is going to get you to a society with better well-being than one based upon rational empiricism and scientific study of what actually makes humans more healthy, more happy, more psychologically stable, and implementing those legislative policies that sort of walk us towards that outcome.
Okay, so Mark, a couple of things here. So, firstly, I think what I said we agree on is the idea that morality shouldn't be legislated. I think we can agree on that part, right? That
I didn't.
there,
Sorry,
generally
just
speaking, morality,
one second, Faisal. I said that not all morality should be
yes.
legislated. Some should be. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. I think we're pretty much aligned on that part.
Okay.
What I was getting to with the idea of objective morality not being possible without transcendental um, legislation is that, firstly, if morality, I think we can probably agree that morality should, by definition, be objective. Otherwise, if two people hold different views, then it doesn't necessarily mean anything. What is morally right, what is morally wrong, if I have a different view on that and you have a different view on that, and let's say the two of us are the only two people on earth, there's no way for you to say that you're doing something wrong or me to say you're doing something wrong, Mark. Do you
Oh, I
agree with that sort of a
strongly
premise?
disagree with that. So, what we're talking about is morality applied to society. So, what we're talking about is societal oughts. And yeah, you're right. Under a meta ethical framework, there's nothing saying that you have to. And that's the objective morality that you're trying to sort of claim exists, that everybody ought to, there's some intrinsic reason everyone ought to care for others and do certain things or adhere to certain moral practices and moral codes. I don't think there is any such designation happening. But once we form a society and we can agree that, for instance, the well being of the people in that society is important, the well being of that society itself is important, we can then make objective moral decisions based upon the rules of that framework. So I don't agree that sort of objective morality is necessary. People can say, hey, I don't care about the well-being of others. In fact, I'm going to work against it. And I don't care about the well-being of society. I'm going to work against that. Well, great. That's fantastic. You can do that if you want. There's nothing stopping you. However, within that society with the moral framework, you will either A, be basically locked up and stopped from damaging the society that we're all a part of, because that is the moral framework for the society, or get out of the society. If you don't want to adhere to the moral framework of that society, leave. Go seasteading. Go to
Mark,
another place where you're
I think
happier.
I think in one way you're conflating legislation with morality again, because the idea of someone being locked up or being excommunicated, right? That sort of implies there's some sort of legislation around it. What I'm talking about primarily here is, and the context in which I was actually talking
Okay.
is that for increasing wellness, right, you need to increase these small acts of kindness that one does for the other, right? That was the context in which I brought this up. Um, General wellness will not increase unless everybody has the idea that if I help this person by just removing some um, obstruction from the road, right? Or I get rid of this rock because if a cyclist comes by and they don't see this rock in the corner, they might actually have an accident, right? If people refuse to do that, it would result in a society where general wellness will not be as good as in a society which actually applies those rules. Does that sort of clarifies where this argument started from?
No, because even in your theocracy societies, they don't legislate small acts of kindness. It's not legislated into their legal code. So
And I agree with that. I agree with that. That's what I was actually
well,
saying.
if I could just sort of finish, so yeah, you can't legislate everything morally, but what will happen if people act immorally is there'll be social repercussions as well. They will be shunned by other people. They will have some sort of social impact on them, and this is how societies have worked forever. We haven't legislated some immoral things, and because we do have a sense of empathy and we do have a sense of reciprocity. We understand that if somebody is basically being a jerk, we don't associate with them, and they kind of have consequences in a societal way as well. So we don't have to legislate every single moral consequence because there are societal consequences for things.
Um, I would say that it's not necessarily the case that for everything there will be a societal consequence. All right.
No, true. Yeah.
Like the kind of actions that I was talking about are things you probably wouldn't even uh, I don't know if you understand that in that sense where I'm coming from. For example, one of the concepts that we have in Islam, right, is that it's an act of charity to smile at someone, right? So just the idea of smiling at the person that you're looking at or the person who sees you is considered, there's a reward in that which is not uh, which you cannot achieve in this world. It's transcendental, right? It only makes sense to someone who believes in the idea that they will be rewarded for it in an afterlife by a transcendental being, that they would actually consider that act of smiling at others as being something worth doing.
No,
All
that's
right.
not
So
true.
so
That's not true. I
hold
just
on.
I just
Can
want to no. I just want to address that really quick. No, because of reciprocity. So if I want to live in a society where people smile at me, I've got to smile at others. It's simply that. It's simply that. And sort of so this whole idea that you need something transcendental for people to do it. People do atheists do things all the time that they don't expect a transcendental reward. So that's clearly demonstrably false. I'm sorry, Faisal. It just is. Go ahead, Batman.
No. So if an atheist does something, right,
Yeah.
the uh, I'm not saying that atheists do something just because they're um, they're an atheist. They wouldn't do it. right? That's not the implications of this.
Then, but
What I'm
your
trying to
point
say
is
here
that
is that the idea of doing it just for the sake of um, basically attaining a reward in an afterlife, right? That that becomes something which you intend to do, right? Instead of just being something which you're looking for a reward, a satisfaction by seeing a smile from the other person. Let's say you smile at me when you're talking, I am really angry at you, right? Would you continue smiling at me or would you change your demeanor?
I don't know. I don't know the circumstances. Usually, I'm blissfully unaware when people are angry at me, so I probably wouldn't even notice. Anyway, the whole point is that you can look at these Islamic societies, and I challenge you to give me one Islamic society that is happier on the whole than a secular society.
So here's the thing, Mark.
What's
Your
the thing?
definition or your criteria for judging a society in that sense, right? That
Sure.
is this happier or is this not happier?
Mm-hmm.
I would sincerely say that before you go ahead and ask me for that, give me your measure and let me tell you whether or not I agree with it or not before we go about doing it. Because
So, what's your
your
metric?
gi- my metrics are different. It's not just, I mean, this is
Well,
not a
that's fine. They're
very
different. What is
simple and
it?
straightforward
I,
piece, right? So, for example, my metric is one of the first things that I look at is what are the family values, right? How well people are treating each other, right? How cohesive the society is as a whole, right?
Shouldn't that make
There are
more
other
happiness?
metrics that I would actually look at, which probably you would not look into. So it's just a different worldview on how things should be measured rather than just giving me your yardstick to measure and basically tell me how well or how good or how bad that society is.
I would break in here to say
I'll try
that
and find the metric I would
even
use.
with
Sorry.
even with that we're not talking about we're talking about human societies here. We're talking about a human society that might be based on a particular set of God beliefs. But this is a very meta conversation in certain respects
Yeah.
because we're kicking the conversation upstairs to God. And when in reality, we're still dealing with how humans interrelate with each other. So your metric is founded on family and this and that and the other thing. We can have an argument over that, um,
Stephanie,
and
just
we'll still have that argument whether there's a God involved or whether there isn't a God involved, and it comes down to which God are you going to pick. I mean, there was some discussion in the side chat. Which God are you going to pick? Does your God consider me an abomination?
I don't
Does
know what
your God
you
does your
mean by
God does your God don't well there there are people like the people of Westboro Baptist Church who somebody in the side chat said are a joke. It's no fucking joke to me when people are parading around with signs outside of uh, outside of
I
rallies
I
that that
feel
that that,
I
that
feel that
declare
there's
that declare there is a divine hatred toward me as an
can I can I
individual human being.
Well,
can I
let
stop
Steph
you there,
finish. Let
Stephanie?
Steph
Because
finish. I mean,
no, there's something I need to address here because I feel that because there's been a couple of times before as well that Stephanie has um, spoken about this, and I just want to address something. Stephanie, I think as far as our conversation has been, I've not met you before, right? And as far as my conversation with you today has been, I've not come across and said anything to you that would you would consider as me trying to be disrespectful or mean to you. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and
Yeah.
but
So
I am point.
before
But I
you
need to
continue,
press. But no, no. I need to press the point. I would like to assure you. that I'm not questioning your good faith
Yes.
or your kindness as a human being or you as a human being. I'm basically saying that there does exist in the world, uh, demonstrably, a set of people who, out of their deeply held beliefs, and it's not you, it's just generally speaking. I, and we're talking about the organization of society, of a society. And the point I just made was, who's God?
That is a separate thing. I just want to clarify
Well,
something
that
here.
was the
No, no, no,
key to
no,
my
no. Stephanie,
point.
let me clarify something here. So, first of all, I want to make sure that you understand I'm not responsible for every individual who ascribe to my faith, all right? Or every individual who believes in God, okay?
If I am conveying to you as a believer that I do hold you to responsible to everyone that ascribes to your faith. I don't know your individual beliefs. I don't know how you treat your faith or relate to it. And I want to assure you that I have lots of of people of faith who are very good people. And
Actually, generally
we
speaking,
need those people, uh, both atheists, members of marginalized communities. We need those people to not be silent in the face of our oppression.
no, but I just felt that you were coming across as a bit aggressive with some of the statements that you made earlier as well, and with
Could
this
you provide me
specifically
with one?
with the idea that in when you talked about women and
Hmm.
you were I felt that you were saying that in Muslim communities or in Islamic societies, because of faith or belief in God, right, that we oppress women, which is a very common misunderstanding about Islam, right? And unfortunately, I didn't address that immediately, but at the same time, I think what it requires, I believe, is more of a discussion to understand where we come from as Muslims, rather than just saying this is a problem. Let's have that discussion sometime, right? I would be very open to having a more open discussion about some of these aspects and what our viewpoint is, right?
Sure, but but you need to listen to what I actually said. I wasn't saying that it's fundamental to your faith that a particularly oppressive government enacts laws that they base in faith, but they are actually basing in, this is where I'm trying to draw the dichotomy here. What my point was, you can have a deep religious belief and deep faith, but it depends on what that faith causes you to do, not you individually, but what causes a society to do. And there are some societies that are organized principally around faith whose beliefs cause them to do things that cause harm to people. And
And
I'm
I
not directing it. It's not an all Muslims thing. It's not an all Christians thing. I would say the same thing about the Westboro Baptist Church. It's not all believers believe that their God commands them through God's morality. They don't see God's morality as demanding obeisance to some principles that are inimical to people's well-being. But there
And
are enough that do, and those are the ones that tend to acquire power.
actually, Stephanie, that's where I would disagree. So, firstly, God's morality isn't, in that sense, I think that there is a misunderstanding, and I think there is a deeper and more nuanced discussion that needs to be had for this. So definitely, uh, um, we can probably bring that up. But um, what I do want to do, because I do have to go in about 10 minutes or so, right? I do want to just get back to what. Mark and I were talking about and just
Sure.
sort of wrap that up on my end, right?
Yeah.
So Mark, in a sense, and I think it would also sort of explain some of what Stephanie has been talking about. The idea that you have to submit to a higher authority for morality to make sense, where I'm coming from, right? Where when I basically point that out, I'm basically saying you have to submit to a transcendental authority. When you think about it, all the solutions that you will come up with for um, for any form of morality or any form of agreed upon principles which you are talking about, which are not legislated, right? In all of those cases, you're still submitting to some form of authority, because without any authority in place, they don't necessarily make any sense, right?
So I think that your mistake is that you think that because it's transcendental, it automatically will apply to people. But the problem is the argument from moral diversity, basically that all people are going to follow the same interpretation, and they just don't. There's tons of people, and the fact that, and Stephanie had a really good point, the fact that you disagree with some of these theoretical based countries like United Arab Emirates and Djibouti and all of these countries, Iran and that kind of thing, just shows that your objective morality doesn't get you to moral universality. It just doesn't, because you disagree with a vast majority of people in these countries that have criminalized things like being trans and being gay and things like that. So you're not getting to objective morality either, because it's subjective to what you interpret those
Actually,
verses that
I,
you're
I
reading. No.
It,
What you're in.
just for the record, Iran is actually a very trans friendly country,
Oh, really? I
albeit
stand corrected.
yeah,
albeit very very strangely so. You have to they get there through
Well,
very
they
very
had
strange machinations. But hey,
they had a
whatever.
bit of a different thing than before America went and came in there and just deposed of the democratically elected government and then installed the Shah in there in the 70s or something. It was actually a very very liberal kind of country. It was actually very progressive. And then after the Shah, the theocracy took over, and it's been a nightmare ever since. But so the probably are directed towards the Human Development Index, which sort of shows that the Western countries, and that's a whole thing including GDP, happiness, development in the country, industrialization, all these different metrics that have been put in place to show the development of a country. And there are certain countries like United Arab Emirates which are very high, but their GDP is incredibly high. You these theocratical nations don't seem to get you to a developed sort of country that is progressing well. That isn't what we see, and you may be basing your metrics upon sort of some kind of transcendental objective morality, or some how structured a family is. Well, that's not how we determine whether a country's going well. I would say you could have an African country where families are really well developed. It doesn't mean they are doing well as far as sort of a scientific understanding of the word, like a country that is thriving kind of thing. So I don't. I feel like when you say there's some other metrics I wouldn't agree with, that you're talking about specifically adhering to certain precepts in Islam, and I don't see any reason why I nor anybody else should consider them a metric of whether a country is doing well. Um, and sort of to say we can't agree on whether a country is doing well when in one country you've got a society with highly educated people and sort of progressive policies, and they take care of their poor, and they are got a good GDP and their people are happy, as opposed to another one where people are They may have a good family structure and they may, be Islamic, but they're not. Their people are poor and they have to, suffer to get to the places that they want to get to, and there is no social security net. And I don't know how you're going to make that argument, Faisal.
I think that is a very, um, in a way, if you're measuring happiness and if you're measuring well-being by just GDP or some of these metrics, I think it is a very biased approach, because some societies don't value certain things the same way as they are valued in a society here, for example, in the US or Canada or Australia, or generally speaking, the Western world, right?
I I
Um,
know Matt. I know Math Pig wanted to ask a question,
yeah,
and I'm just
yeah, I just saw in the chat.
Oh,
I
sorry,
think
Matt Pick.
we'll probably have to leave that for later. Matt Pig, I hope this is not a long one.
Matt Big, you can't ask
I'm
to ask a
No, the
question
point's
to.
lost. No, no, no. It's diverged. The conversation's gone. It was out of time, and
okay.
yeah.
That's okay. Ask a question. What was the
Well,
question? I'm curious now. I'm going to put you on the spot.
tentatively, there is possibly going to be a future stream dedicated to Faisal, because it seems like there's a really high amount of interest in what he's saying. So we may be doing a dedicated stream later. Please bring all of these ideas at that time.
Yeah, someone in the chat is sort of saying no country is thriving, my dude. We are all circling the drain. I don't believe that, Mac, to him, and I think that um, we are living in the best time that we ever have for education, for happiness, for technological progress, of course. But sort of compared to how countries used to be going, where we were using child labor and people had no rights to unions or anything like that, and people would just work to death. I don't think circling the drain would be where I'd be pointing things. I mean, I'm not sure what country you live in, but I don't see that. I'm
Would you be
sorry.
open to the idea, Mark, that people, when they look at things, they don't always look at statistics? People who are of a basic, like us, like ourselves, have a statistical mind, and the first thing you go to is Google
Sure,
Scholar. You go
sure.
to Google, you do these things. But when you interact with someone on the street, and we're talking about 60 to 70% arbitrary number, but people on the street, they don't do this. They go with their feelings. They go with their gut emotion. So when you say these things, statistics
Yeah.
may disprove it, but there's a sway with that. There's emotion with that. There's just,
right.
No, I get that. I get that. It's just I don't think that's a reliable way to evaluate. Our feelings are often wrong.
I,
I 100% agree
I
with you that it's not a reliable way to, but when you come at a person who has that belief that is it a reliable way, and they see this in TV, and they see these things, and everywhere around them, and the people around them reinforce this constantly, and you tell them it's bullshit, here's a paper, they're going to dismiss you.
Well, yeah, and I mean the media's part way to blame for that because it's all the
the
ratings is
media is
gotten
hugely
by
to blame for that.
you know doom and gloom, and it's all going to down the toilet, and we're about to collapse and stuff. And I don't think that's the case. I think that the media just runs those stories because that's what gets the views, kind of thing. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I get you.
What
I
I'm
A
understand. I'm
quick
I'm, I'm
pause.
what
sorry,
I'm
Mac.
saying is
I didn't mean to
Just
jump down your
just a
throat, Mac,
quick
to him, and
pause.
I do apologize.
I
no,
know
no,
that
no, no. I
everyone's
just I
brains
got
get derailed when I do this, but and I'm so sorry that I have to on occasion. Faisal, so many thanks for coming in
It was a
and
good talk. Yeah.
engaging with everyone. I really deeply appreciate it. I hope that
love
you'll
the
be
icon.
available for a dedicated show later, but I want you to be able to have a little bit of floor space to give any wrap up thoughts because you need to go.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just waiting, Matt Pig, do you still have a question, or was that
It
gonna
was
be a
lost
long?
in the trail of thought, and I
All
do
right,
have this
okay,
thing where if people
okay.
interrupt, I lose the trail of thought.
That's good. So it's been a nice, interesting discussion overall. I know I decided to jump in because I know I would be coming in with different point of view on a lot of things. It will be interesting to have that discussion with the people here, because it's always good to have an opposing thought, to allow your thoughts to develop, to allow your concepts to develop. Uh, Without question, everybody's been amazing so far. No, I don't feel disrespected on anything. I just want to make sure
Good.
that overall, if there are misunderstandings, that we have the opportunity to talk it over and understand and come to, um, even if we come to a disagreement, right?
I,
I think we can come to a respectful disagreement,
Sure.
I
right?
would say to you, Faisal, ma salama, and shukran.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie.
I would, if you're open on Saturday night, what would be 6 p.m. Eastern, man? I do an open live panel. I'd welcome to have you on. Something
All right.
very similar to yourself. What I aim for is an Irish pub on a Friday night where people can shout and row and scream at each other. And no matter what happens, the next week when you come back, the other person will buy you a pint and say, "Welcome back." You know, it's speak your opinion, be honest, say your mind, and you're more than welcome to come and join us on Saturday.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. I'll, if time permits, I will definitely join up. Richard, um, we'll connect for our session. Hopefully, we'll be able to arrange something soon. And thank you, everybody, for having me.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you, Faisal. It was really good to
Bye.
talk to you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, so the whole idea of the shower, I see you wrote that in, Stephanie. You're right. It's yeah, 50s, not 70s. I do apologize, got that completely wrong. But um, yeah, it, you look at the pictures of Iran back in the 50s and things, and they were just sort of very just normal. You know, their people were very happy and, you know, just a democratic country. It's really, I blame the US. So sorry, everyone. I blame the US. It's US meddling that caused
We
the
do too.
entire problem. Yeah,
Yeah, I blame the U.S. I mean, the overthrowing Mossadegh, who was a socialist, was a bad move. It was the Brits and the Americans.
yeah,
British Petroleum was the key instigator there. It was all about oil. Well, as it usually is.
yeah.
And people also, you got to understand that Iran is Persia. It's not an Arab country. They speak an Indo-European language. It's written in Arabic script, but it's a whole different thing. None of these things are universal. It's like, but I want to go back to my point, and it wasn't directed against Faisal. It's when you construct a theocracy, you're just kicking it upstairs. When people talk about God's morality, I want to know which God. Pick one. And pick the God you want. Is it Allah, which means in Arabic the God, Allah? You know, it's God, right? It's God. It's not a different God, really. It's just the Abrahamic God. Uh,
Stephanie, I think the
which
crux
God?
of that
Which
whole
which God are you talking about?
I think the crux of your whole point is that there is no objective mind with which to understand any given religion, and each practitioner actually understands it differently, necessarily. And
Yeah.
because of that, we can never have agreement.
Well, and even if they
Yes,
believe in
that's
the same God,
and so it ultimately redounds to
Subjective.
humans negotiating what makes a just society, what makes a society that comes to a common understanding of morality. And if we get, if in absent any God, large number people, I mean,
um,
people used to talk about godless communism. If a large number of people come to the understanding that this particular political slash moral system is correct, that's the moral system that people are going to have to operate under, even if that means that people are marginalized, pushed to the edges, and in fact pushed off the fucking earth.
Well, and
So
even if people
whether there's a God, whether there isn't a God, you're still winding up with people making decisions about who lives and dies.
Right, and people, even if they believe in the same God and attest to the same God, they still have different interpretations of the same text and passage and things like that. So you're really looking at people say, well, objective morality is being gotten from God. But the problem comes that the book was written by a person who interpreted what let's assume, for instance, God is a real thing and stated these things. A person wrote it down interpreting what God said, and then another person read it interpreting what the person said. So there isn't a direct line to objective morality anyway. Even if it exists, you can't actually put it into practice because you don't have it. It's still subjective to how you interpret the words. And that's why we get the Shia and Sunni. It's why we get tons of different denominations of Christians. It's why we get almost a different interpretation for, every single sort of small sect out there, because it's all up to that interpretation. So even if there is an objective morality from God, we don't have access to it. Or else, if we did have access to it, everyone would believe the same thing, and they don't.
So
And I know Batman
can I
wants to.
just say something, please? So first of all, you're all wrong.
Okay,
Right?
I, that's good.
Okay. So there's two. So the first thing I'll address is this might be a doozy, but just humor me. So do you guys know about the Kree in Marvel Comics?
Which
Yeah,
They
creed?
the
the
Kree, the
Cree,
blue people,
KREE. Yeah,
Captain Marvel. Yeah.
yeah.
So they have what is called the Supreme Intelligence, right? And it's essentially a supercomputer that's created using the most genius minds that their society have created, right?
Okay,
Ever generated, right? All of their morals, their technological decisions, all of that is, uh, all of those decisions are made by that machine. And what they do is that they input data, obviously, right? And just like any computer, right? It, it'll give you a result based on the data that you input, right? And funny enough, what you find a lot of times is that is that the that intelligence, it will sometimes make decisions, right? And remember, they anything that particular supreme intelligence say, right? They do, right? Its word is law, essentially, right? And so there are plenty of times in the comics where it has made decisions that has essentially caused discrimination in the society, genocide to be, genocide, all sorts of stuff, right? And and so to me, the way how I look at it is that you can't take uh, some would call it. I wouldn't necessarily say it a scientific approach to human issues and human morals, right? Um, because what will happen is that one, you'll still have people that are going to disagree solely based on how they feel things, right? Not only that, we can all argue logically about what we want to be the case, right? And we can provide logical arguments, right? But we all argue based on what we personally want, right? So now you still run into the issue where even though the supreme intelligence, right, is a set, is supposed to be this objective machine that is going to be making, all of their decisions, right? It's the most intelligent thing that exists. They still disagree with it, and there are points where it even got destroyed by the same people, right? Now, the other part of it, this is about the theocracy part of it, where people ascribe to the idea of objective morality, right? I don't think that's a thing. I don't think it's possible because we don't have like some kind of hive mind, right? And so not only that, if you want to posit something like that and create your morals, ground your morals in the existence of God and whatever, right? I mean, the only way to truly know whether or not something is good or bad, or whether or not someone committed a crime and their intent and stuff like that, right? It is to get that God involved. And as far as we're concerned, God is not directly involving himself when it comes to a lot of these issues. So it would make sense to form any, you know, laws around morality grounded in a God that doesn't directly interact with us. What I'm um, proposing is that we use the tools that we have, right? We have the ability to empathize. We have the ability to gather data, right? We have the ability to look at what is right and wrong for our society and get those things um, fixed, right? But the issue that you run with, right, that you run into is that, well, it's not even something we can all agree on, right? And so, the other thing too that we're not really thinking about is that we as humans we apply our morals to a lot of different things, right, that we don't fully understand. Like for example, I remember watching a video about a particular tribe in Africa, and one of the ways they get their food, right? They do their herding and stuff like that. But what they do, for example, is that they'll strangle a goat instead of, for example, slitting its throat or shooting in the head or whatever, right? And the reason why they do that, why they do the strangling, um, is that they realize over time that for one, they need the blood because where they live, there's not a lot of water, so they need something to drink, right? Um, and so that's what they drink, right? And so it the way how they do it as well is that it's not a situation where they don't have any respect for the animal, right? They do it as quickly and as cleanly as possible, right? They even pray before they go through with the whole thing, right? But what I found in the comment section are people basically injecting their morals into those people's lifestyles, right? Saying this is bad and this and that, right? And so again, I think the best method that you know we can apply is to do two things: get money out of politics, um, use data, right? Um, use our intelligence to make logical decisions as to what we should legislate, right? For the beneficial to, as you say, for example, Mark, right? Increase the well-being for for as much people as possible in our society, right? And so, I don't necessarily think that this thing should be grounded in any ideology because as humans we're constantly evolving, and maybe we'll evolve in a particular way that requires changing of our minds when it comes to things, right? But if we're going to change our mind, we should be able to study our own behavior, right? Looking at and ponder the results of those changes and make a decision based off of that, understanding the possible consequences. See what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
the gentleman that left, I wanted to say something to him,
Faisal.
but Faisal, I get what he's saying, but it's not practical. Kindness, to me, right? Kindness is something that you do to um to to two things. kindness is something that you do that is just socially acceptable, not necessarily because it's responsible, right? Or because it's the good thing to do, right? Two, if we're going to be good to each other, right, or going to live in a way that is going to maximize the well-being of each other, we should not ground that in a reward. We should do it because it's the logical thing to do, right?
Well, that depends. It depends on what you want the outcome to be. Because if your outcome is to sort of glorify God, then what you would see as logical for the well being of people may not be what's logical to glorify God under certain belief systems. And that's the whole
I mean,
point.
sure.
Well,
I mean,
the
sure,
whole.
but
Well,
just real quick, right? Just
okay.
real quick. For I don't want to lose my train of thought. What I'm saying is that regardless of whatever you ground that in, if you want to ground it in rationalism, science, or God, that doesn't matter to me at least, right? As long as it's getting the results, right? To where, for example, what Stephanie wants, right? To be able to live a life to where she wouldn't be able to fear certain things or feel, depressed or feel like people who are, within her particular group, right, would feel oppressed or anything like that or be oppressed, right? Because all of those things that we're doing, right? Those those are human interactions, and I'm sorry, we have to put our beliefs aside and be considerate, regardless of whatever you believe. Because what I find is that, regardless of whether or not someone believes in a God, a bigot's going to be a bigot, regardless. It doesn't matter whether you believe or not, right? People have these proclivities a lot of the times. People have these proclivities before they become religious. And true, they can develop these when they become religious. But this is why you find that a lot of people, when they deconvert, for example, right, they no longer hold bigoted beliefs or ideas, right? Because they just weren't that way. But you do have some people, whenever they change religions, right, or they change their political ideology, they still maintain um certain types of bigotry. See what I'm saying? So the whole God thing, all of that is relevant to me, right? None of that. There's a saying that Bob Marley said in one of his songs: if you know what life is worth, you'll look for yours on earth, right? And if you understand that basic idea, right? You shouldn't be looking for that in the skies. You should be looking for that like right in front of you with other people. Like for me, this shit is simple.
Well, I
All
don't
right, I'm
Christian
think.
finished.
Paul, the
Yeah,
Christian theologian Paul Tillich put it like the title of
I've
probably
been
his
trying to
most
speak
famous
for
book
ages.
is Be Here Now. So go ahead,
Yeah.
Mark.
Well,
I'm
I don't
sorry.
think it's simple as that. There's nothing simple about morality. It's incredibly complex. I understand it might be simple for you, Batman, but I think when applied to societies with all these different moral standards, all these different moral obligations, all these different moral virtues, like it's insanely complex, and getting them to work together isn't as easy as that. Uh, so, what I like to point out is some things, and I agree with partly what you're saying. Some things are sort of irrelevant where the foundation is. If things are compatible, like if a Christian and I both care about the well-being of people and the well-being of society, it's irrelevant what else that they're going for. That is enough. That's compatible with my morality, and we can progress. The problem comes when, like for instance, in a theocracy where it's criminal to be a trans person, right? That is not compatible with my idea of morality. And luckily, as human beings, we have this sense of empathy where most people will agree that that's not right, because we have this sense of empathy to say, well, if I was that person, I would feel awful. Feel terrible if I was criminalized for who I am. I'm not going to treat other people that way. And in fact, you can have people who believe in a holy book that states clearly that certain people should be killed or certain things should happen to people, and they don't believe in it because of their sense of empathy. And I don't think you need much more than that. But everything that sort of agrees with well-being is even if they don't state it as that, is compatible with my morality and therefore can work in society. And when we're talking about societies, and this is my sort of takeaway. So when we're talking about the human species and societies, we are a societal creature. It's how we flourish. It's how we succeed. And that's sort of when I was getting back to, well, evolution isn't sort of doesn't give us a moral system, but it gives us the tools to work with one. So that sense of empathy and reciprocity is what allows us to make societies in order to be successful. Now, I don't think there's anything in the universe that says that humans have to succeed, that we can't just collapse into small societies, fight among one another, destroy one another, and fail as a species, and join the massive long list of extincted species that have been there forever. But if you want us to survive and succeed and thrive, we have to work as a society, and I think, and this is just my opinion, that we have to rely on a marketplace of ideas to say this is the best way forward to value the well-being of each other, and that's what I put out as the best ideas. Other people have other ideas. Some are probably better. But what I look for is, are they compatible with what I think is morally correct? And are they compatible with what society has deemed to be morally correct? Um, that's basically what we're doing. And the worst of the morals we legislate, the other ones we have sort of a almost a social justice. Just as apes will shun others that sort of violate their morals, we can shun people that violate our morals. But I really would disagree that, man. I don't think any of this is easy or simple. I mean, when you get into trolley problems, I love trolley problems because changing the parameters of those problems, you always find that people will not agree on which group should live or die, which group should, you can put in place these examples where there is no moral decision or there is no immoral decision. There's always one out there, and so it becomes incredibly complex. Um, but yeah, I do appreciate your sentiment. I do agree with you, Mr. The foundation doesn't matter as long as it's compatible with my morality. Sure, let's do that. Absolutely.
And, I think that anybody's entitled to a religious belief. You believe in a God, you can believe in whichever God. And
Yeah.
there, people like to insist that there's only one God. That my God, the one I believe in, is the God. Uh, but at the end of the day, it's like there are a lot of people all over the world. Not everybody, Christianity, everybody. It's the majority religion on the planet at the moment. Everybody believes in that God, but I I grant the possibility maybe there is an ultimate intelligence. Haven't seen any evidence of it, but okay, fine. But at the end of the day, it's when you have when somebody's God commands them to do terrible things, like shun their own family because they no longer believe in that God. When that God commands them to do to when that God is an instrument of division in the human community. If you want to take the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, it's like your brothers and sisters, kids, get your shit together. Uh, when people take that and just and when that God becomes a source of division rather than a source of unity, then it's it's like we're stuck with the God of the Tower of Babel. Let's divide humanity because otherwise they might become gods. And maybe God was right to fear that. Because when we discover our capacity for being decent, maybe that's the time where we get to go and shake the hand of God and say, let's call a truce here, pal. Let's just call a truce. Let us get our shit together. You have nothing to fear from us.
There's something
Stop
about you,
making us
Stephanie.
have something that, and stop, fucking stop. Let's fear each other. Your name.
You know, interestingly enough, the Hebrew word for Pharaoh is divider.
Interesting.
The Hebrew word maybe, but the Egyptian word is basically
No,
the
oh, it's
White
God. Yeah,
House.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't. For there's two ways I look at it. I think people have um I think people always have a choice, regardless of what you believe, right? And the way how I look at it is that it comes back down to what you want. Sure, let's grant what Stephanie says, right? There's a particular deity that exists, and it commands its people to you know not like people who are trans or gay or people who are just doesn't fit into that set mold, right? People have a choice as to whether or not they want to ascribe to that belief, and they want to exercise um a commandment, if you will, or a law at the end of the day, right? And so for me, right, I don't think I don't think their beliefs necessarily rids them of responsibility, human responsibility, right, about their views and how they choose to treat people. Because if you're a good person understanding what good is, right, um, then you would know that certain commandments to oppress other people simply because they're different from you, right, is wrong. You would know that. And so by choosing, right, to not do the good thing, right, then to me, you're just a shitty person. That's the way how I look at it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of shitty people. And I'm sorry, but humans humans have a tendency for conflict, right? I don't understand why, right? We can all exist within our societies and not mess with each other, but we do. We just have these proclivities that just push us to conflict, and we have a very interesting way of justifying that conflict, right? And um, you know, putting other humans in a position to suffer, right? Especially when we can gain from it. And so, you know, again, to me, right, it's not a God problem, it's a human problem. That's the way how I look at it, regardless of your belief. Because even if the God is perfectly good and he's giving you all of these these instructions, right? Regard, uh, you're still going to do whatever you want to do at the end of the day, right? And so that's my view on it, right? I don't blame the God. I don't even blame the religion. I blame the humans. And I think that's the perspective that we have to take when we address stuff like this. Because if we take the human aspect out of it, well, look what we're going to have, right? Regardless of the dogma that you decide to ascribe to. Because I guarantee you, if you eliminate religion, we're still going to have these problems. We're just going to ground our morality and reasoning for doing reprehensible things into something else.
But
That's all we're going to do.
don't you think it's gotten better since religion has become less prevalent?
I mean, I don't think we've gotten better because religion has gotten less prevalent. I think we've gotten better um, because of our abilities And as a result, people no longer rely on religion or need religion to feel better or to experience better, right? Sure, I'm a Christian, but I don't take away the human aspect of it,
Okay.
right? My practice um, is and focus is on here on earth, not for the reward or anything like that, right? I'm doing it because I understand that I really don't need a reason to be good. That's or to do good by others. It's called being graceful, right? I think maybe what the our Muslim brother was trying to say was that um, maybe he was trying to use the word grace, being graceful versus being kind, right? But I don't know. I'm speculating. I'm sure he'll probably clear that up at some point, right? However, I think that a lot of things that we do, a lot of decisions that we make, should be grounded in grace and just
Oh,
being good to each other. That's what I think, regardless of
okay, no, from here on, I'm considering it your wrapping up thoughts. Just know that.
damn Richard. Can you?
There is no end to this conversation, guys. I'm sorry, but you have to cut it off sometime. Peace and respect, Pat and Dave.
God
Yeah.
bless you,
So
my friend. Thanks for
Peace
being
and,
here.
peace and respect to you too, sir.
yeah, so
Stephanie. Well, no,
Oh,
no, I'm
okay.
serious.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm okay. I'll give you 3 more minutes, just because I love you.
What, what,
Thank
you,
you. I appreciate it.
you mentioned my name, but yes, I'll talk to you later.
So, what I'm saying is that I think at the end of the day, right? I think we have the tools um, to get results. I think that there are certain things that exist within our societies that's preventing us from getting results. That's one of the things I brought up briefly was, for example, money in politics and stuff like that, right? Like that's one of the incentives that prevent us from living in a society where more people can flourish and have, you know, a better, a better well-being, a better existence, right? Um, I'm not going to go. Obviously, I don't have the time to go into that, but I think that should be our main focus versus the religiosity of people, right? And what they might ground their views in, right? I think you should look at the people themselves.
And to that effect, people tend to pick their religion, which means they already agree with it. Stephanie, last final wrap up, sort of. Mm-hmm.
Uh huh.
Mm-hmm.
Be kind to each other. That's what I ask. I think a lot of theists think atheists are out to destroy God, and I don't think that's certainly it's not my goal, and I don't want to impose on someone's belief system. I mean, I appreciate the Dilettanteism of well, a bad belief leads you to further bad beliefs. I appreciate that argument, but I think for some people, the uh, the attachment to the numinous is something that people are loath to let go of. And
Mm.
I just my wish is that people would look at the if you want need to get all hemi demi semi godly like look at the divinity in your neighbor. Look at the divinity in your brother and your sister. Look at the divinity in the people in a YouTube channel, and 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 as you say, every time you greet someone, peace and respect. We can do this. And we can do this with or without God. And when we do, if we find the capacity for doing that, the world will be a better place.
Namaste. I see the God in you. Pat.
Hello, my friend. I'll say a quick amen on the way out my door. I totally agree with what he's saying in terms of let's see the reality. Let's see the divinity in everything.
That's
Let's
the
see each
she.
other as who we are. She, okay. Let's see each other how we truly are. Obviously, I'm on it. I can only hear your voice. I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know your thing. But I agree with you. In every which way in that way. And let's be kind
As
to one
Richard
another.
will attest,
That's what
I
it's all
smoke a
about.
lot
That's
and I'm
cool.
old.
That's cool, girl, dude. You do your thing. Like you gotta. It's what it is. It's we're in the flesh. It's a mortal body. Let's give love unto one another. I don't judge you all after your flesh. None of that stuff. Let's believe in the power of God and stuff. Obviously, I disagree with what I think you said something like whether we need God or not. Obviously, we need God. God's going to do everything. That's my opinion. And I love you all very much. And even the people who don't believe in God, they really don't understand how much God revolves in their life and things. And they will see, and we will all, that is the love amongst one another. So I'm thankful to be with you all. Thank you for having me, Richard. Just quick message. God bless you all. Stay safe, stay peaceful, and all that.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, Dave backstage. I'm so sorry. I'm not going to bring you in just to close you out. I want to have an actual conversation with you sometime. So thank you all for coming by. Special thanks to Mark, Reid, and Stephanie, and Batman.
Do
And
I get a wrap
who
up?
else had a whole lot to say? Yeah, and oh my
No.
gosh, the guy that looks like the actor, James Apperson. Thank you very much for all your contributions, James Apperson as well, and everyone in the side chat. I wouldn't mind if you voted on their video. That would be okay. I would appreciate it if you did. Thumbs up or thumbs down, whatever you feel, but please vote before you go. And I want you all to know I deeply look forward to the day that we're all great friends. You all add to me, and I am forever in your debt. Truly. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Richard. Really appreciate it, man. I'm going to take off, but yeah, that was really good conversation, especially as far as one. Thanks, Batman and Stephanie. A pleasure as always. As always.
Oh, thank
Um,
you, every single one of you. It was great. It's great
yeah,
fun. So these are in fact never-ending conversations.
of
They
course,
are.
of course.
We've been talking about this stuff ever since Christ was a corporal, or
Yeah, yeah.
I
Way before
imagine
that.
the
Mm,
Neanderthals were having conversations
probably,
along these
yeah.
lines as well.
Well, the thing is, as
Probably.
as things change, the discussions on moralities are going to change, and as we go forward, is it moral to get an asteroid and tow it to mine its resources? Is it going to be moral for cloning? Like, there's going to be, it's because we are always changing as humans that morality always changes because our societies always change. That's the only thing that is
Exactly.
reliable is change. But I'm gonna take off. A pleasure as always. Love you, Richard. Absolute pleasure. But take care, mate, and I'll see you all later.